WLOO has been invited to the home of resident artist William J. Krupinski. He has welcomed us into his home, and he will be showing us and giving us a guided tour of his art.
Hi, I'm Bill Krupinski. Come on in.
Here we are in Bill's showroom and living room, surrounded by all of his amazing art. Bill's art is painting and drawing, sandblasting, uses a variety of different media, but it's all two-dimensional, representational kind of art. Over the course of this episode, we'll be exploring all of Bill's art. He will be our guide. But at first, I'd like to have Bill tell us a little something about himself. You've told me that you have been an artist your entire life, and just how far back does that go?
Well, thanks for the introduction. Well, I always like to say I started drawing when I was just a little kid. One time my mother was cleaning out my grandfather's house after he passed away, and to get me out of her way, she threw out a roll of shelf paper and gave me some crayons, and I started crawling around on that, and little, my little sticky little hands, and I started drawing, and I never stopped.
And did your parents encourage you in your art?
Yes and no, because my dad always felt that I should get like a real job, a real career. But as I discovered later in life, long after he passed away, that he too had started trying to do art and stuff when he was in his teens, before the war came along. And in fact, recently, not that many years ago, I keep finding stuff of his, and I showed this to Faye. I said, "Look at this," and she goes, "When did you draw that?" I said, "I didn't draw that. My dad drew that in 1940. And like our styles were almost identical from when I was like in high school.
That's amazing.
It was uncanny.
That really is uncanny.
And so, and then he was a medic in the war, and so when he came back, he started taking up photography classes, and also on the GI Bill. And then also we got into printing, where he was a stat cameraman, which is those big cameras that you walk into, like the whole room is a developing studio, and they don't have that anymore. But so I learned a lot from him, actually, mostly about composition and whatnot. But yeah, where was I going with that?
Oh, I had asked you if your parents had encouraged you, and you basically said your father was also an artist, but it sounded like he felt that an artist isn't a reliable, steady way to make a living, and you have to realize that, and it sounded like maybe he was a little concerned that you develop a trade.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, my mom was a musician and a writer, and of course my mother, and so me and my other brothers always used to say that she stealth taught us because we were such knuckleheads. You know, we had to figure stuff out for ourselves through trial and error, but she always kind of tried to gently guide us in these different ways. And so I know way too much about Broadway musicals and classical music, and took lessons in all these instruments, and I can't even play. That's why I'm a drummer. I'm not a real musician.
Well,
that's a joke.
yeah, I know. We don't know how important percussion is.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's kind of the foundation, you know. And so I had that as a background. Plus, they would take me along to. They developed a kind of a process of journalism that my mom would write for these different trade magazines, and she had some friends in the floral industry, so she ended up writing for these different trade magazines for the floral industry. Like the biggest one was Florist's Review, and so my mom and my dad, these conventions were huge. This was in the 1950s, and so he would take the pictures of the flower arrangements, and then they would have seminars on how to, like, you know, they would disassemble it and then show you how they, you know, they're using foam to stick this thing in, and like that, or, you know, new development, we're using clay to put, you know, that kind of thing. And so, and then he would even do diagrams. And so that's kind of where I picked that up, is his drawing style. And that was the first thing I ever had published or anything, was my mom had to like talk my dad into it, because it was kind of like injure his pride that that she would like wanted me to draw this, but she was trying to encourage me.
Sure.
And so yeah, so I did one of these diagrams for a flower arrangement for a florist review, and my other brother Bob was on the cover a couple times when he was like 3 years old, like in wedding shots with or Valentine's Day with a flower heart-shaped wreath and this kind of stuff. So really, that's kind of in my blood. It's this kind of journalism, photography, print, and music. A lot of my art is based in music, foundation of it, and so I've always been drawn into the music world as well.
Now, didn't you start your graphic art kind of drawing in high school?
Yeah, and that's when I did that first florist review drawing, and but I was on the school paper. They didn't know what else to do with me, because I didn't like sports. That didn't interest me. But they got me on the paper, and I was doing the high school paper cartoons. But also on the side, I was trying to draw stuff for the florist review, and I'd show it to my mom, because she would be like my editor. But I started drifting into kind of political statements, so I kind of dropped that, because I think this is how I fell into like political cartooning, because I did a statement on the use of I think it was 2,4-D. You know that? Yeah, it's like a real toxic thing, and you know, and this is a big industry, and that's like their thing. And so yeah, I showed that to her. It was like I don't know, it was like a guy on a soapbox of 2,4-D and something, I don't remember, but she goes, no, they're not gonna like this.
Not in this magazine, huh?
No, and so then at that point in high school, well, as I grew up, you know, at first it was like the influence of Mad magazine. Every artist will tell you that they started out reading Mad magazine, and then it was Rat Fink and Big Daddy Roth with the hot rods and all that kind of stuff. So I tried to copy that my own way, and then in high school along came underground comics.
Right.
And that just blew my teenage mind. My brother was 5 years older than me, so he could legally buy these things, because you couldn't buy them if you were under 21. You know, like Zap Comics and that kind of stuff.
That's right.
So he would like sneak me all the new underground comics, and that's actually where I kind of self-taught myself how to draw, by copying the major underground cartoonists like Robert Crumb and Gilbert Shelton, and also the poster work of Rick Griffin, just awesome. And then other ones like Greg Irons and stuff. And so that was in high school, and then about that time too, I got involved with, there was you have to be a certain age to remember this, there was underground newspapers in the 60s.
Yes.
Yeah, and they were political and cultural and all different levels of things. And my brother Bob was working on doing layout and paste up for that on East Side Milwaukee, and he did like a few headers and stuff for the lettering. And so I was starting to hang around with these guys, and so my first ever actually published thing aside from Florist Review was I did like a little header for a music column. At that moment I knew I had arrived. I knew what I wanted to do with my life. To draw pictures and cartoons and whatnot that you could say inspired people, made them think, shattered their ideas, I guess, you know, so that And that became a sub-theme of my work a lot, but especially the political stuff. It's like, the idea was that the art would pull you in, and then you go, hey, what's that? And then before you know it, you've learned something, damn it, you know? So that's kind of like the underlying premise, actually, of most of my work, is that, you know, I did do a lot of political type stuff over the years.
You never went to art school, did you? You're
No.
completely self-taught.
Yeah, and I didn't go to college either, because I barely graduated high school, and the thought of going back to any kind of school for 4 more years I just couldn't stand it.
Not for you.
And which was kind of tough too, because at that time, most guys my age were going to college to get out of the draft. So then that was all tied into this too. There was a whole long journey of that. And I actually, in one of my self-published comics, I had the first part of the 2-part story of how it was that I got out of the draft. Now that's another whole long story, but
So, since you weren't going to college, since you did not get drafted, but you had to pay the bills, somehow you had to make ends meet. So how did you do that?
well, you know, you're 18 and you're trying to get out in the world and you don't know anything. Basically, you know, I would try a few different jobs and stuff, and you know, try for a day or two, and I go, that's it. You do the same thing over and over and over. No, I can't do that. I would fry my brain. And so, you know, and then meanwhile, I was trying to develop, what I fell into was what I call trying to build my own graphic art empire. And so I would go to like counterculture businesses, I guess you could say, like head shops and that kind of stuff. And I would talk that, you know, have them draw up an ad for them, and then they would print it in like the local underground paper, or what became the Bugle American, and that kind of stuff. And so I was, you know, doing a lot of that. Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of back and forth on all that, but that's basically it. I tried to sell my talents, and I got, you know, and I did a lot of posters and ads for all those kind of businesses back then, and there used to be a thing called the Alternate site in Milwaukee, which was part of the Music in the Park series, and this is a well-loved memory for a lot of people, because it was like a Sunday afternoon, and they'd have rock bands play in the park, and it was like a big hippie party, you know. And so I did posters for that, and so I did almost all the posters for that series over 3 years. And well, I reprinted a bunch of them, but I thought they would sell, and I tried a few years ago to sell them at an art show in Milwaukee, and it's like, yeah, that's cool, whatever. It's like,
When did you get into painting vehicles and making signs professionally?
well, then we jump ahead. Yeah, so as far as the painting signs and lettering on vehicles and pinstriping and all that, that kind of, you know, developed over my 20s, kind of as a natural procession from what I had been doing, because you're making ads, and so naturally that follows making signs. But I kind of disdained that during my 20s, because I thought I was an artist. This is not art. But eventually I had to, I was living up north, and there was no way I was going to make any living doing the ads and whatnot. So I self-taught myself how to hand letter the signs, which at the time, this was quite a few years before computers came on. And sign painters at that time were very secretive and did not want to teach people how to paint signs, because, as they would say, well, I'll teach you how to paint, next thing you know, you'll be going on your own, it'll be competition for me, which was true.
Yes.
But yeah, so I didn't really have anybody to mentor me. So there again, like the art in high school and stuff. I had to self-teach myself all this basically from scratch and from books and looking at art and stuff like this. You know, and I would see once in a while, I would see an actual sign painter doing what he was doing, and it fascinated me. And that was a really cool process. And I enjoyed a lot of aspects of it, but, you know, it eventually led to some burnout. But, you know, I like the idea of that, talking to a lot of different people, getting to know what they wanted, and I did what I always call the earn what you learn process. So I would go out and I would sell a job, and then I'd come back home and I'd go, man, how am I going to do this? So I did a lot of that, and that was rough because I was living out in the country. This was like 40 miles west of Wausau. And so I started out in these small towns up there, you know, population 1,200 kind of stuff. That's what Colby was. And so in many ways it was a mismatch, but on the other hand it was a good foundation to ground me into doing something that I could earn a living, you know, or eke out a living, I would say. But nonetheless, I was able to do it, but it was hard because, you know, it was a totally different culture than what I had grown up in. Rural farm country, I mean, it was all farm country, dairy farms and all that, and I was living out in the country with a friend, and so I had to adjust to that, and it was difficult, and often, and also there was the issue of, well, that was like the early 80s, but yeah, so like hippies were still looked down upon at that time, so a lot of times I had that prejudice against me if I walk in, you know, like, as would happen to me sometimes in Milwaukee. I'd walk in the door and of a restaurant or something, and you know, this happened more than once. You know, the bartender would something go, "You're not welcome here."
Wow.
Yeah, it happened more often than you would think, and so there was that kind of element up in the country too. You know, so I had to like really do a hard sell, or you know, try to be convince them somehow that they needed me to do this sign for them. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so that was...
But you did it.
I did it.
You did it.
I did it.
Sheer perseverance.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I've always ever learned anything is, and my brother Doug always likes to say that too, all of us brothers, it's like, we just had to learn the hard way. Because we were kind of knuckleheads. Or as my mom would call us sometimes, you dumb bunnies. If we do something knuckleheaded, you know. But yeah, so, and then my girlfriend at the time, she wanted to get away from that atmosphere. She grew up in the next town over, and she just wanted to, she had spent a little time in Eau Claire and Wausau, around like co-ops, like food co-ops and stuff. Mm-hmm. So she was kind of into alternate culture, and she was trying to be a vegetarian. So this was really sad. So we'd go to these family meals and stuff, and they'd have all this ham, and all this meat, and all this stuff. And you know, back then I was a big drinker, so we'd do brandy, and beer, and smoking cigarettes, and all this stuff. And so they'd have this big meal on Sunday afternoon, and she'd open up a can of peas and eat it out of a can.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it was really sad. So that was kind of a motivating force for us to move to be near a different culture, so to speak. So eventually, well, she had a cousin that did signs in Abbotsford, and he said, "Oh yeah, I know a guy that does signs in Fort Atkinson. You can talk to him. Maybe he can help you get established or something." So, yeah. So yeah, we started going on to Fort Atkinson and talking to her cousin, and that's a whole other story. But anyways, because he was a character, and So we were going from up north down here for several times, and we had looked at other cities all around, you know, like Eau Claire and Wausau and stuff, and I didn't like them really. I didn't like their vibe, whatever. So one day we decided to take a different route going home, and so we came through Jefferson, and we're coming up at the main street, and that was before they tore down a lot of buildings there.
Right.
When they still had the cobbled brick
Yes.
street downtown.
I remember.
Yeah, okay. And so we're going down there, and we're by the hotel, which, you know, at that time there was this little Greek guy that would sit on the balcony and like would wife beater shirt and look down on the traffic, and and
yes, I remember.
okay. And so we're driving down there, and she goes, "Oh, this is darling. We have to move here." I said, "But so we eventually did, and it was kind of like also a microcosm of living up north, but also a microcosm of the old Polish South Side in Milwaukee. It was very insular and cliquish, and families, you know, if you were not from the area, you know how that goes.
I do.
Yeah, and so if you're not from an area, then you're an outsider, and I've remained that my whole life. You know, I've lived here since 1986.
So in 1986, you moved to Jefferson based on the enthusiastic reviews given by your significant other.
Right.
And I'm assuming then you had a period of stability and you were able to start up a sign and car painting business, try to make a living with your art. And stability is really what it takes to penetrate a market and to become familiar with what the area wants. And we have a number of items from that period that we will be looking at. And the first one of those items is this great sign.
Yeah, that's a sign that I sandblasted this for to use in art shows and in my gallery out. I had a sampled area out in my garage. But yeah, this is sandblasted sign foam, so that's one of the areas that I worked in with signs. Is you put a stencil on that, and cut it out, and sandblast it. So I got a bunch of that stuff out in the garage there. But yeah, so this is one from that period. But you know, as far as getting established and whatnot, that was, well, first off, I figured if I could eke out a living in Colby, Wisconsin, population 1,200, I thought it should be fairly easy to do that in Jefferson, population 7,000, and with Fort nearby, so there's a lot more access to businesses, but it was still the kind of the insular rural community kind of thing, and breaking that barrier of not being from someplace. And so it was a real struggle to get established that way, because there was also a guy in a couple towns over that it was always getting ahead of me and underselling me by like a half or something. And I finally figured out what was going on, because I would come in and would say, well, I'll you know, say how much to do whatever you're talking about, and I would say, and they'd say, well, so-and-so will do it for like, if I'd say like 70 or 80 bucks, you know, they said, well, he'll do it for 20 bucks. And I was like, well, I can't compete with that. That's more than my paint costs, or less than my paint costs. And so what I finally figured out, as I got to lay of the land here, is that this guy did it as a hobby and for beer money, because his wife had some kind of good job where she had super insurance, and he would go like to auctions and stuff and buy paint and stuff like this. So he had like a whole pole building full of like paint and stuff that he got for, you know, $5 for like a pickup truck full of paint or something. And so there's no way I could compete with that. And so it took me quite a while to get over that, and I just about almost didn't make it just because of that. So, you know, once again, that old school sign painting stuff was super competitive. And then you also ran into the insular community thing as well, because, you know, because when I went over to that town to try and sell signs there, everybody would go, oh, why should I do it with you? You know, you're not from here. I would have so-and-so do it because he's from town, and then that would happen in Fort. And so, well, I don't know you. We always had so-and-so do our stuff. So I really had to kind of learn how to work with that and dial in my approach on selling it and all that. But I still had long hair and stuff, so there was always that prejudice as well. Because these are conservative rural communities. And like I said earlier, Jefferson, when I lived in Toma for a year too, was kind of preparatory for Jefferson, because they're very much the same.
They are.
Yeah. And
less of a military presence in Jefferson.
right, but still that insular rural thing. And like I was saying before, Jefferson though was, well, it didn't have the military presence, but it had, like I always like to say, it was like taking the old south side of Milwaukee that I grew up in, with all these ton of these little bars and all these little places and very insular and tightly bound and stuff. And it was like you had taken part of the south side and just moved it out into the country. To me, you know, that was my feel. But also, there was this undercurrent, you know, people don't recognize this, but I did, is that growing up in Milwaukee, there was always like this prejudice on the part of German people against anybody who was not German. And so being Polish was looked down upon, and you were, you know, you didn't count. And so that, I ran into that here.
I know it.
Really?
When I was going to school in Fort Atkinson, which is where I grew up,
Yeah.
that was, you know, that was an ethnic slur.
Yeah, exactly.
It was an
Don't
ethnic
be
slur.
Don't be a Polak.
Yep, and in grade school.
Yep.
So,
Okay,
I understand.
You said it, yeah. Yeah, and I grew up with that, and so seeing it here, and that was another prejudice barrier that I kind of had to overcome. And so after, well, this was a long time later, but I changed the name of my sign business from Krupinski Science and Art to the Sign Wizard, so that that name would not be out there, so you couldn't culturally be prejudiced automatically by my name.
It's a Polish name.
Yeah, Krupinski. And so right away, you're not from here. And you know, you look at the phone book at the time, there was like only 2 other Polish names in the phone book for Jefferson. So, you know, and that is another thing that took me a while to figure out. And you know, these prejudices run deep. You know, maybe this is off the topic, but one time, one of the banks in town, they got a new big sandblasted sign for one of their new offices. And I went to my contact at that bank, and I said, well, why didn't you call me for a quote? And they said, oh, we didn't think you did that. And I said, well, next time, you know, can you just give me a call and let me give you a quote? And he said, and so like, a few days later, I get a call from the president of the bank that I need to come down and see him. And he's one of these crew cut guys and stuff. And, and so he pulls me into his office, which was downtown on a corner. And I'm in there, you know, and he does this psych thing where, you know, he pretends he's doing something in his back to me, and so I can absorb his office. And he's got all these pictures of Jefferson from back to 1840 or whatever the hell it was, you know, and families, and you know, he's from this family, and there's this other family, these founding families of Jefferson, German families. But so after a few minutes, lets me absorb that, and then he turns around and you know, well, yeah, I'm going to talk to you about that. Talking to my staff member about the sign. I said, yeah. He said, you don't tell us what to do. You're not from here. You do not count. You may go now.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. I to this day, and that was the same thing I used to run into at being a hippie in Milwaukee, too. And so then you got those double strikes against you. You got the long hair and you're a Polak. And so I was like, okay, so it was like, okay, I got it. Thank you.
Message received.
Message received.
But you did get customers.
Yeah, I persisted. Yeah, he persisted. And,
Yes.
and I did make friends, and I had a lot of good customers in between the jerks, because you know, I run into jerks everywhere, and all like that. So, yeah, so I kind of was eking out a living doing that, and I was also, again, teaching myself stuff and sign techniques, and I would go to these kind of like sign painters kind of conventions or seminar kind of things, and that's where I learned about doing sandblasting, and I was learning about pinstriping, and I did, you know, I lettered trucks and stuff like that, you know, but you always had to kind of sell it to people, and, and so I kind of had to learn how to approach that. But that said, then my doing the kind of art I loved kind of languished for a long time, because I had to focus so much on doing this stuff to make a living that I, you know, had to be focused on making money. I still love doing cartoons though. So when I was living in Colby, I realized I also wanted to be doing political cartoons and hopefully someday sell them. So I started teaching myself how to do editorial cartoons, like back in the 80s, you know, all those years in the mid-century, newspapers had editorial cartoonists.
Sure.
And so I taught myself that starting in the Reagan era. So I got a few Reagan era cartoons carving him up. And so that was kind of like an underlying context. So I always knew to myself that I wanted to, like, there was something more I wanted to do than just this making a living and just doing sign painting and that kind of related art, you know. So I always had that underlying motivation, and I could never couldn't figure out what that was, you know. There was just something driving me, and which eventually is what I'm doing here today, because finally after I retired, I could take the money element out of it, and I could become free of that. I could tap into what my, you know, my deeper concerns, with stuff that appealed to me, themes and ideas and types of art.
Did you mention that the solvents and paints that you had to work with started affecting your health too?
Yeah, and that's another thing, because, you know, nobody wore masks or anything back then, and in the arts in general, but sign painting especially, you're working with all these toxic paints, solvents, chemicals, thinners, all that kind of stuff.
And painting vehicles too, I imagine, huh?
And painting vehicles, and well, I never did like the whole spray and body stuff.
Oh, okay.
That was not my thing. But
You did the fine pinstriping.
right, and pinstriping,
And lettering.
on the truck, or
Right.
trailers and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
And then you added to that, when in my 20s, I worked for a few years in screen printing, and that's like massive toxic chemicals. And which I found out later, after this other thing, I found out that all that stuff builds up in your liver and your body fat, and it stores it, and so it affects your liver the same way that alcohol affects your liver as cirrhosis for the liver. And then I was a big drinker back then, and so those things all kind of were building up, and then one day I was lettering a bunch of vehicles out at somebody's pole shed, and it was new buildings, so they didn't really have heat in there, so they had these, you know, those kerosene little tornado space heaters. Well, I didn't know, and nobody told me, apparently they didn't know, that those are not meant for an enclosed area. That's like for a job site, construction site, to just keep it from freezing, not to heat your area, because it's got the carbon monoxide. And so we were in there 3 days. Well, the first 2 days they were pulling vehicles in and out. That was keeping the air fresh enough, and you know, so that wasn't the problem. But the third day, I was doing the finished painting and all this stuff and finishing up on the last bits of the vehicles, and I was cranking the heat up because I wanted to get it to dry.
Right.
And not knowing that what was going on, and so long story short, I almost died from carbon monoxide poisoning on this job, you know, because I couldn't recognize it, partly because that carbon monoxide poisoning presents almost the same as when you've been painting too much and lettering in a shop or something. You kind of get this dull headache and you get kind of pissed off, and it's just like it narrows your vision down. Well, yeah, so I was getting that, and I was just finishing, and I fell off the last 2 rungs of my ladder and flipped this paint up, and I got this paint all over me, and I'm cleaning myself off with the thinner and stuff, and I was rah, 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 rah. But the reason I was also having to leave was because I had to take my girlfriend to get her driver's license test that day. If I'd have stayed there, probably in another 20 minutes I would have died. Mm. So and that way you could say that. But so after we were done with that, I went over and I packed up all my stuff and left because I was done. And I came home and I crashed, and I didn't know where I was for 2 weeks, and it took me 5, 7 years to get all that out of my system.
So that was your wake-up call.
Yeah, and then that's also why I had to get out of the sign business.
Mm-hmm.
But also at that same time, it was just when computers and cut vinyl was transitioning into,
mm-hmm.
and the main emphasis there was that it was cheap. So people would come in and say, well, I can get a vinyl sign for this truck here for $5. What do you want? $75 to letter this truck by hand. So, well, yeah, I got to make a living. Blah, 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 blah. So if I wanted to get into vinyl, for one thing, I had to have invested in thousands of dollars of equipment, like the cutter and the plotters and the vinyl itself. Plus, I forget the name of it, biphenyl chloride. One of those things, vinyl actually is gassing off this other toxic chemical all the time. So even if you're just sitting in the room working with the computer, you're breathing that in. Mm-hmm. So I was okay, well, I'm not doing that. So I just had to get out of science altogether and start over again while trying to stay alive. Mm-hmm. and cleanse myself and all this kind of stuff.
And that opened up a new phase.
Yes, that was another rough transition. Yeah, and another phase in my work as well.
And you moved to acrylic because it's water-based and not toxic.
Right, but that was like that took longer for me to kind of transition to, because it's so much easier to work with oil-based paints. Mm. They're so much more fluid and cover better. Mm-hmm. And with acrylics, you got to go over 2-3 times to build layer up your color, and and I was like, oh man, come on. So I was trying to focus on these other things. Like first, I tried to put together. At the time, the advertising industry, graphic art industry, was hiring artists to do these series of clip arts. Uh-huh. And so basically you would sell them, you would, like for a pittance, you would sell them like all your best little images, and then they would sell it to be used as computer art. So I tried doing that, and I worked with some computer guys and tried to do I tried to pull out things that I thought would be good clip arts of all my past stuff, from layouts and designs and the images and stuff. And I tried to take that to these science shows I would go to, and and they were like, oh, well, I could do that myself. It was like, I'd spent all this money on these hundreds of developing that, and it was a total bust. plus the guy that I had developing this, he didn't format it right for what sign people needed. You know, I'd ask sign people what you need, and I told them they need this. And so he claimed he was doing that. Well, they were like, no, this is crap. You can't even use this. So then I got into a whole other piss and match with that guy. So anyway, so I moved on from that, and it was, so it was a series of downward spiral from there, because I couldn't work in signs anymore, and I couldn't really do any kind of graphic art because of the computer aspect. So, you know, when I had started out years before, I was trying to build my art empire on stuff I could draw myself and all like that. Well, that wasn't acceptable anymore suddenly. And so then after, at some point in there, I decided I was going to try and do the art show circuit. So I made up a bunch of whole series of my Cosmic Portal series. So that's kind of must be where I started this thing where I work in series of stuff. You see, I make like 3 of something all the time. That comes from when I was in science. I would make like 3 sketches for people to choose from, and invariably they would choose the first one I made, so I don't know why I bothered. But so yeah. So what was that?
Well, you were moving into acrylics and doing the art shows.
Okay, yeah, the art show thing. Yeah, and that I was doing with just pen and ink and watercolors or colored pencils. That's what I was most comfortable with. But it was kind of, well, I'll show you some of it. But anyways, I didn't know how to access my market, you know, or my demographic of people that would enjoy that. So invariably, and I took out a loan and stuff. I got like the tent and all this stuff, and frames and all that. But invariably, at the show, like you know, some woman would go by and go, "Oh, that's so cute. That would look great in my baby's room and stuff." And then they'd look at it, and it was priced as an original, you know, so maybe it'd be like $120 or something. And they go, "Oh, but not for those prices." Oh, you know. So like after a season of that, I just had to like give that up, because I think I only sold like 1 or 2 originals that way. And so I ended up giving a lot of those away to potential girlfriends who were not impressed by it either. Oh dear. But I got the best stuff saved yet, because I never sold anyways. But other than a few people, friends of my mom's or something, doing a pity buy.
Oh dear. So then you moved over into posters, right? And band art cover?
Well, I had always been involved interacting with the music world because, well, for one thing, in high school, one of my brothers was in a band that had like a #1 hit in the 60s. And so that's where we kind of the access point. And so I was always, you know, interacting when I started trying to do artwork for bands and stuff, starting with kind of my brother's group. It was just kind of a natural thing. You know, we'd be hanging out with the band, and I'd draw cartoons, and you know, being teenagers, I'd be drawing like these risque kind of cartoons and cracking the guys up, you know, and and that's transitioned into those posters and the ads that I was doing then. But that was not really an option anymore at that point. I mean, as far as a whole living, I mean, I tried, but I just didn't really have. I had lost my contact with kind of the music world until after. So I had lost my contacts kind of with the music world when I first moved down to Jefferson. But we did go once in a while to see bands in Madison, and that was real cool. But my girlfriend just wasn't into it. You know, I was like into the blues and stuff, and all the blues rock bands, and you know, we saw Paul Black and the Flip Kings.
Oh, sure.
All that kind of stuff, or something like the Crystal Corner.
Crystal Corner Bar in Madison.
Yeah, or the Harmony once in a while. But you know, there again, it was 30-mile dry, and so I didn't really establish any kind of presence there. So yeah, so that was not really going to be a money-making scheme, side hustle, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I kept trying, and then in the meantime, after the poisoning, I was trying to, flush myself out and try to stay alive, not be dead.
Right. Yeah, that's a good goal. Good goal.
And so, through a series of events, I had been involved with some of the fighting the mine issue up north. They were fighting the Cranberry mine. And so I had got involved with that, and I was doing like editorial cartoons and different art to educate people and to print papers and stuff. And so I made a connection with a whole different group of people, and I started to get knowing some Native American people out there, and I met the different activists and stuff. So after the poisoning, I ended my relationship with my longtime girlfriend, and so I almost right away I started looking into that community for somebody to connect with, and I did. And although I didn't find out so much later, my friends from that activism were saying, "Why are you going out with her? She's crazy." We've been trying to get her to a psychiatrist for years.
Oh dear.
But so anyway, so this one activist at the time was a big presence in the anti-mining stuff, and he was in spearfishing rights thing up north, and treaty rights was Walter Zett. And so I ended up working with him a lot on a lot of these things, doing posters and banners and political cartoons, educational stuff. And like the thing I'm most proudest of in that part of my life was that when they wanted to pass the mining law and the mining moratorium, I forget the full name of it, but at any rate, there was they were going to vote on that in the legislature. So they had Walt wrote up like he would write up these like little editorials and letter type things, and because he was a known presence in the community, he would print his stuff, in the papers, but mostly like the reservation newspapers.
Right.
But so anyways, he wrote one of these op-ed pieces about why the mining law should be passed, and then they had me draw a cartoon about that. It was like Tommy Thompson on the head of a Titanic heading for an iceberg, and somehow that was that's where they were headed if we didn't pass that law. But they put that together on with his opinion piece, and somehow mysteriously copies of that appeared on the desk of every legislator the day of the vote, and it passed by only a few votes, but I helped pass it. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's that really brings home the power of editorial cartooning or graphic art as a tool for change and education. And so that's always been underlying in my thinking too. And so the sign painting kind of suppressed that, but so I got involved in that, and then that's about the time that I got the poisoning, and then Walt died like a year or two after that, and that was a pretty big deal. But anyways, so a few months after he passed away, he came to me in a vision, and one of these things when something like that's coming to you, and he specifically said this message, and I saw him dancing in a grass dance outfit, but that was on fire. And the message, I woke up and I was like, his voice was right here, he's dead, wait a minute. And so I told this new girlfriend about that, because she was involved, she knew Walt, and she said, wow, you gotta go talk to this guy. And this guy lived around the corner from her in Madison, and he did healing sweat lodges, And so I told him what happened, and he said, well, you gotta start coming to Sweat Lodge.
And you needed to do the purification anyway to
Exactly.
clear your liver out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it took me like a good 2 years of just laying on the ground and breathing on for the ground to even be able to like stay alive, you know. But it kind of, I think it helped save my life as well, you know. Like sweating it out, and trying to change my diet, and that was the other thing, is the result of the poisoning is that a doctor told me, he said, well, he explained to me the whole thing, the relationship with the liver and the paints and the alcohol. He says that this poisoning basically is doing to your liver what alcoholism does, and cirrhosis of the liver. And if you can keep on drinking, but you will shortly die a slow, painful, ugly death, or you can stop drinking. And you know, and I didn't really understand how deep of a problem I had with it my whole adult life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and so, but somehow something clicked. I was like, okay, I'm done. You know, it took me a little while to, you know, kick it, but I never went back either. That's another thing that I like was self-motivated to do.
So Bill, as you were purifying your liver and purifying your spirit through the Sweat Lodge and Native American traditions, it seemed as though that also introduced a new phase in your art and in the subjects for your art, and
Yeah.
how you did your art.
Yeah, it was, and you know, I've always been interested in metaphysics and that kind of meditative stuff, and so that kind of was being brought to the fore again by going to these sweat lodges as well. But I was in a complete transition phase of everything in my life, and so about the time that I was doing it, plus I had used up all my money, and so I was like living on nothing. I had nothing, and so the house started falling apart, and it was getting worse and worse. But so I took out a loan to get all this, like I said before, I did the art show circuit for a year. I did some research on how to do all that, and I had done that a little bit in the 70s with my etch glass and other stuff like that. So I was comparatively familiar with what I was dealing with. But I took out a loan and I got the tent and the panels to show it on, and all this other stuff and frames, and you know, it was like $10,000 to put into frames, matting, tent, and all this other stuff. And then I drew up that Cosmic Portal series as I was kind of coming out of getting better through the Sweat Lodge. Then I kind of was melding into this new process or new transitioning, you know. And so I didn't have and I was transitioning in my spiritual self as well as artistic self. But I seem to have to want to do this stuff that's kind of that has light in it, that's full of I don't know what to say. It's like Faye would call it love, but you know, it's like a sort of a whimsy, but also I don't know. It's hard to explain that because I had such a cartooning background. I never been able to do like this kind of like dramatic, harsh kind of artwork or themes or anything, you know. And you know, like when I tried to do tattooing, you know, it's all like stuff with teeth and dragons and mean stuff and everything. I just never really do that. It wasn't me. But that came later. But so first I got the loan. I did the art show circuit for a year, and that didn't work out. And so then my nephew had been doing tattooing, and he said, well, you know, you've got the job or the skills, you know, why don't you do tattooing? So then I try to learn a bunch of stuff about tattooing.
Sure.
And I tried opening up a shop here in Jefferson, and that went bust for several different reasons. But that only lasted 6 months, so I was really broke then. So yeah, and that began kind of a yet another downward spiral, because I had just had, also was coming, that period I had been in a really negative relationship, and so I had to kind of recover emotionally, and so I think that probably I don't know, motivated, led me into thinking more in these kind of metaphysical aspects of things and being more reflective, I guess you could say.
Some of the drawings that you have made and showed me are incredible at really depicting an emotional state, a mood, so that the viewer can feel the mood just by looking at that drawing, and we'll be sharing some of those later. And one of the things I really love about your work, in fact, is that it has so much feeling in it. The whimsy, the playfulness. Yes.
Yeah, and I've been always trying
but you
to
do things with light too.
Right.
You don't make dark
No.
work. You've tried,
Yes.
but even then, there's still a little. There's always hope in it.
Right.
And there's a picture I like a lot, which we'll see later, which shows this man clearly having a dark night of the soul, but you can tell just by the way you did the shading and the light in that drawing that, well, this is, the light is here, the light is coming. This is the end of his dark night of the soul, and the light is just beginning to come back in.
Well,
So all these struggles
yeah.
that you have been through, something keeps you going, and I think you have that faith, you have that belief. The light is still here, there's something new around the corner, there's always hope.
Yeah, well, you really summed it up well. I guess we're done here now. No, but that's so true. Even in my darkest hours in my life, and like particularly in my 20s and stuff, where I got really down deep into drugs and alcohol and stuff, I even tried drawing from a dark place, because I was in a dark place, but I couldn't. I always knew somehow deep inside me there was something keeping me going, and that I had that sense of hope and light and humor, I guess, all those things you talk about, and it was always underlying, and so it would come out even if I wasn't really conscious of it. Only later did I kind of become more conscious of it. So when you connect to that, you're kind of channeling that. And so that's, I think, what going into the metaphysics and stuff helped me open up to even further. And plus, it was a natural procession, because I had been involved with social and environmental justice issues with the cartooning and working with the mining stuff and all like that. And so yeah, so there was always this underlying spiritual kind of metaphysical foundation that would come through even if I wasn't really aware of it. And so you see that, and yeah, and so that kind of was always coming through, because like I said, I tried doing tattoos for a while, and it was like, this stuff just makes me think of like, it looks like to me somebody that was huffing glue and had a bad trip, It's just like, yeah, why would you want that,
Sure.
And then the other part of that was too, is you had all these images that they copied to call it flash, and so people would watch stuff, and it's like, I had to bite my tongue all the time, because I was like, you want that crap on you? That's going to be permanent, And so I was not really suited for the tattoo business, I guess, just underneath all that. But what really finally broke it for me is I had a couple in there, and they were like about 20 years old, and they had this like 2-year-old kid, and he's running around my tattoo shop. It's like, hey, adults only, there's sharp stuff around here, you know, get that kid out of here. That's what I'm thinking. I don't know what to do, you know, and the kids running around, and like trying to like keep them away from sharp stuff. But I overheard them, they were looking at the flash, they got these designs on the wall, and he said, I heard him say, well, if we don't pay the electric bill this month, I can afford this tattoo.
Oh,
and
dear.
I was like, I'm done. I'm just done, you know, because to my view, it's like a certain percentage of people that are getting these tattoos and stuff are a downward spiral. Other people are collectors and art appreciators, and it's a personal expression of something very special to them. But then there's other people that are just in a downward spiral. And, you know, like one time I had a guy come in and I was doing like this armband of thorns and stuff, you know, it's like, meh. And one of the things they tell you is like a legal thing is, you know, or a medical thing rather, is that people shouldn't be on drugs or drunk or anything like that because you could bleed out, supposedly, theoretically, you know, it stains your blood or whatever, doesn't coagulate. And so I'm working on this guy, and we're chatting and stuff, and started talking about drugs and stuff, as you inevitably would. And and he goes, oh yeah, I'm on heroin right now.
Oh boy.
And I go, oh man, it's okay, well I hope you don't bleed out. It was okay, but it was like, yeah, I'm not comfortable with that.
One of those little signs that said this isn't for you.
This is a downward spiral that I'm enabling.
Yeah.
And so it was all that kind of stuff that, and that was part of that underlying thing that I knew I was being saved for, I guess, saved for something different, something else, something move forward. Because that was the other thing. I had lost count of how many times I almost died in my life, and I eventually started realizing that these were lessons that I had to learn to not stop doing whatever that was. But it took me a long time to figure that out. When I was about 28 or so, I started figuring out how many times I had near-death experiences, and I got up to like about 200.
Jeez.
And so I said, you know, I think I'm going to stop counting this. Maybe there's something I should be learning here.
Yeah.
But it took me a lot longer yet to start realizing that I was needing to learn lessons, but that was at least the start. You know.
One of the things that comes through to me in your work is this sense that there are veils between different layers of reality, and that kind of perception is more easy to come by if you have had near-death experiences. You know, I think it does give someone a sense that there is more than our earthly flesh, that there are different layers, that there's something else out there, and it's you know, people address it in different ways, of course, but I think, you know, that's a message that comes through, especially in your later pieces.
Yeah,
There are
sense
layers,
of hope in them.
and there's a sense of hope in them, and there's a natural order, and anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of a procession.
Yeah, a procession. Something that you had mentioned earlier, and I would like to touch on it in a little bit more detail, is how your hard-won, self-taught skills of lettering and graphic arts techniques have been threatened and then competed against, outcompeted by, in some respects, by technology, by computer programs.
Absolutely.
That now people don't really think about drawing something with their hands. There's a software program that will do that.
Yeah, well, I was mentioning earlier, a number of times I would, this started happening in the 90s, you know, I would show somebody a design or a drawing and something, and they would say, oh, that's really cool, what program did you use? I go, what are you talking about? So, well, what computer program did you use to make that art? I said, well, I drew it. They said, no, seriously, what did you use? And I would finally go, well, sure, okay, it's a 5-point program, it's called My Hand. You know, and that would go over their heads too. People don't have any sense of, what's the word, not humor, but satire.
Right.
Irony, whatever it is. But,
So I would like to go through your process a little bit using an example piece here.
Okay, yeah, great.
And this is the example piece.
What's the title of that one? Oh, I didn't write the title on there. I don't know what it's called.
What's interesting about this piece is, first of all, it is with a non-toxic acrylic,
That's all acrylic.
and it's
Wood
painted
panel.
on a wood panel.
Mm-hmm.
And what Bill does when he makes one of these is first you draw it out, right, with pencil, pen, and ink. So what you're seeing here isn't just I sat down with a paintbrush and did this. There's the preliminary sketches and and all that work. He has the painting here. The painting has a theme that I'd like to explore in just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But right now the process then is he can go ahead and make posters off of this, or he can put it on
This here.
this here, his sweatshirt Alien DNA. The alien,
Yeah, I pulled this graphic from this, and then added lettering in Photoshop, and so then that way it could be reprinted online on these print-on-demand sites where you can get stuff printed on anything. And I got 2 or 3 of them, which I don't really make that much money from, but still, it's like another outlet.
and see that's part of your story, is this perseverance and adaptability.
Oh, sure.
So you did jump in with the computer age, and you know how to use Photoshop and how to incorporate it into your work, but it all flows from the 5-point plan there. That's where it comes from.
5-point program, that's true.
Yep.
And I think a lot of that also kind of, through the design process, you know, that's where you start, you come up with a kind of rough outer idea, and then you start sketching out designs until you dial it into what you want. And that's kind of, you know, you could say it takes some of the spontaneity out of it, but not really, because by the time you get to actually painting then you're adapting the whole time you're working.
Mm-hmm.
And so this painting does not look like the actual original drawing. It looks a lot like it, but because there's, you know, different things when you scale stuff or when you're adding actual color in person, that it changes the dimensions. Because that was another thing I learned in sign painting, is that what looks good at a business card size or even a sketch size doesn't read the same when you scale it up. And so like somebody would bring me like a layout, you know, I do like a simple layout, they wanted a simple sign. And they said, well, oh, I have a friend that does art at work, and so I'm gonna have them, I'll show you what I want that they did. So they'd bring me in something that's got like a paragraph of wording on it and some crappy piece of clip art that they got offline and stuff. And I said, well, okay, I can do that, but it's gonna cost a lot more, because that's a lot more wording. And plus this sign you wanted to be able to read from the road, so then I would have to explain, you know, okay, well, if you want all this wording on it, I could do that, but if you want it to be readable, you're gonna have to figure out, so I would explain the process. You know, if this little layout you want, you know, on a 4x8, then these letterings here are going to have to be, to read from the road, 4 inches, for example, for the small stuff. And so I went through this one time with this one lady in particular, and and she was like getting madder and madder as I was explaining this. I said, well, you know, there's a scale and there's a readability scale. And when you transition something from paper to a format that's a larger format, it's going to change how you perceive it, how you look at it, how you see it. And so she's like slowly, she's getting like the little teapot starting to and she's getting madder and madder and stuff. And at first she was good looking, so she was like trying to bat her eyelashes and say, well, can't you just do it for me? And I said, well, not really. You know, it's physics, you know, it's
the laws of physics don't change for anybody.
It's the law. So, yeah, so finally I said, okay, if you want this with these letters at 4 inches from this, you know, this 12 pica lettering, then that's going to make this whole sign have to be 4 by 8 inches, or 4 by 8 feet, and it's going to cost you like $600. And she just wanted like a 2 by 3 frickin' sign that said so-and-so construction.
Right, right, right.
And I was going to do it for like, I don't know, $75 or whatever. So I'm going through all this rigmarole to have her understand that, you know, and she wants all this stuff on here, and oh, I'm buying it for my husband's birthday, and oh, I want to make him happy. And it's okay, well, this is the reality. So finally, she said the kettle starts going, and she looks down at the thing, and she finally says, "Fine, do it the way you said." And she turns around on her heel, whips out the door, and slams the door, and one of the things, the rings off the doorknob goes flying across the room.
Mm.
And I watch her go peeling gravel out the road, out the driveway. Wow, okay. And then I look down and I say, oh, she left her layout here. So then I see the car coming back. She comes peeling back into the driveway, spitting gravel. She comes back into the room, and I look at her. I'm just sitting here like this, you know. I said, oh yeah, you forgot your layout. She grabbed it and turned around and she slammed the door, and the rest of the doorknob went flying across the room. All this for like a $75 sign. You know, it's just not worth it. And that would happen all the time, you know. So you end up having to educate people just on the physics of the, you know, the dynamics of scale and perspective, whatever, you know, that, you know, this isn't going to read right. What looks good as a business card is not necessarily going to look good as a 4 by 8 sign or a billboard.
People can't read fast enough to read the whole thing when they're going 55 miles an hour.
And also that goes to the use of font. You know, if you use some fancy unreadable font in a billboard, you know, they go, oh, I don't know, it says something, I don't know. You know, I see that all the time, you know, truck lettering on billboards and stuff. I know they're advertising something while somebody's smiling, you know. You see it all the time on the freeway and everything. Is, I don't know, you know, but they just wasted $1,000 or whatever. It's like,
yeah.
And that's because they're graphic artists or ad agency or whatever talked them into this cool layout that looked good as a business card, but looks like shit and is unreadable as a 10 by 20 foot billboard. You know, so that was another reason I was kind of glad to get out of science, because it was like, man, this is exhausting.
So with your art here, one of the themes that you're doing now that I personally enjoy is in addition to the metaphysical element, you have the alien as a common theme. And I was just thinking, especially after listening to your story about being Polish in this area and being told that you aren't one of us and all of that, I was like, you know, kind of the humor here is glorying in being the alien.
Sure.
You know, even your shirt, alien DNA. See, I'm Polish. I've got this alien Polish DNA.
Sure, it's kind of a rebellious statement in one way.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
it also, to me, is all these are kind of also opening up possibilities and you know, options. That there's other ways, there's other possibilities in reality. There's other ways of thinking, for sure. Yeah, and that's kind of an underlying theme. This was the first shop sign I ever made for my sign shop. It says, when I lived in Colby, it's a sandblasted sign, and I took the graphic from an 1890s German magazine engraving. I just love the idea of youth being happy and the old one being bogged down and trying to figure stuff out, you know. And then, of course, I did a series of spoofs on local towns here. I don't know if you can make that out, but and then oh yeah, this is my big one. This is for Jefferson here, Jefferson Skunk, and they used to have that cat food factory that smelled so bad. That's why it's Jefferson Skunk. And then making fun of Gametlakite. And then sample pinstriping I did. See, these are all samples for the signs. And yeah, I even got one around the door thing. Yeah.
Probably so.
Yeah, these are more samples. This Imperator, I made up, my girlfriend had me watching the soap opera All My Children at the time, and some millionaire guy had a yacht in the East River, and he called it the Imperator. And just a lot of stuff to kind of experiment with techniques and stuff. So I cut that one up there out of a piece of plastic to look like brush strokes. And then these I made at some of these sign conventions that we went to. So that was kind of some fun stuff. Yeah, it was good. And this was the magnetic signs I had on my first sign truck. It's a Colby for discerning merchants. And then over here, we've got, this is my mural of Leonard Pelletier, the American Indian Movement activist that was put in jail for life. And so I put this up at the time in solidarity, and sometimes I post that for educational purposes. And then this was one of the signs I had out front, out by the road. Again, experimenting with techniques and styles and whatnot. I would change them every couple of years. And then this I did, I was involved with the environmental group in Jefferson County here that was working on zoning issues and all like that kind of stuff. And so we held an art auction to raise funds for the work. So there was that. And of course my address sign I made. And then this one here I had next to the door, walk-in door outside here. Because people need to know the hours, and even though it said closed Sunday, people would come in and insist on wanting to talk to me, because it was the only time they had. Oh, I know I get time. And then this is, I don't know what you call this kind of art. I took a TV frame and made this in here, virtual and reality. You know, that's where we are now. We're living in a virtual world, but the reality is we're overpopulated and we're killing the planet. And then the Pink Blues band, I made up for a band I was in. Because my friend, his name was Laverne Pink, so it was cool to call it the Pink Blues Band. It's pink time, baby! And I love Day of the Dead stuff too. And I gave several of these to some Mexican friends of mine. They really loved them. And I would make like these trays. I was trying to make them look old, so I used techniques to make them look old. Home cooking just like Mama's. And some more stuff for sign painting convention stuff. And this one's a kind of spoofing Fort Atkinson. This was my first shop truck. I got an old Dodge Army wagon, Army truck when I lived in Toma, and we custom painted it, and then I would put those magnetic signs on it. And yeah,
just various signs I used for stuff.